Welcome to Tears of Karma. I walked into the family gathering with a quiet pride stitched into every thread of my outfit. The jacket wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, bought with money I had earned, not borrowed or stolen. My shoes were simple, polished enough to shine faintly under the chandelier's light. For the first time in years, I thought I might stand among them without shame. But the whispers started almost immediately. They slithered between clinking glasses and brittle laughter, curling into my ears like venom. My cousin's eyes flicked to my sleeves, and I caught the curl of Clara's lip before she leaned into her sister's ear. A ripple of suppressed laughter spread across the room, a tide I could not stop. The chandelier above shimmered like it was mocking me too, its brilliance a cruel contrast to the plainness of my clothes. Every detail of the room seemed sharpened against me. The glint of crystal glasses, the scent of expensive perfume, the golden frames on the walls. Everything screamed wealth and belonging, except me. My uncle lifted his glass, his smirk carving across the room like a knife. "Did you pick that up from the bargain bin?" he asked, voice light, careless, but the room roared with laughter. I kept my eyes fixed on the wine in my hand, swirling it so no one could see the storm in my gaze. I smiled, just barely, a brittle smile like cracked porcelain. Inside, each chuckle pressed against an old wound, reopening it, deepening it. I felt again the familiar ache of being the family's scapegoat, the forgotten one, the one they could humiliate for sport. But what they did not know, what they could not imagine, was the truth I carried within me. Their mockery was not a dagger, it was fuel. Every insult was a spark against the kindling I had been stacking for years. So I left early, not with tears, but with resolve. As the doors closed behind me and their laughter rang in my ears, I whispered to myself, they would regret every cruel word. They mocked my clothes. One day soon, I would own the roof over their heads. I was born into silence, the kind that comes after doors slam and footsteps never return. My mother left before I could form memories of her, and my father filled the void not with love, but with Cecilia, a woman who looked at me as though I were a stain she couldn't scrub out. She smiled for the world, but her true face was a mirror of disdain. She called me a burden often enough that the word seemed etched into my bones. My half-siblings, raised on her whispers, learned to echo her cruelty. At the dinner table, I was invisible until a mistake gave them reason to laugh. A dropped spoon, a mispronounced word. Each slip became a performance for their delight. Even my grandmother, the one I thought would hold me, turned cold. "You'll never be like them," she muttered once, not as warning but as verdict. Her words clung to me more tightly than any embrace ever had. School offered no refuge. I stood at events alone while my cousins, draped in perfect clothes, soaked in applause. My shoes were too worn, my accent too sharp, my face too plain. Laughter followed me everywhere, chasing me home, slipping under my door like smoke. But somewhere in the ashes of humiliation, something stubborn sparked. Survival. I learned to observe, to swallow my anger whole, to turn silence into armor. While they wasted their strength mocking me, I saved mine. Betrayal was not a wound anymore. It was my inheritance. And with inheritance comes ownership. I was the forgotten child, yes. But forgotten things have a way of returning. And when they do, they don't return quietly. One day they would hear me, and it would not be laughter. The mansion was never just a house. It was a stage, and I was always cast as the fool. The glittering chandeliers spilled light on my shame. The marble floors echoed my humiliation, and the gilded walls seemed to laugh with them whenever I faltered. Every corner of that estate was soaked in my memories of ridicule, memories I carried like scars. I used to imagine burning it to the ground, watching their smugness turn to ash. But I learned early that fire consumes everything, even the victor. No, my revenge had to be colder, more patient. So while they dined under chandeliers and drank from crystal, I worked in shadows. I took jobs they sneered at, washing dishes, lifting boxes, cleaning the very kind of floors they danced on. What they dismissed as humiliation became my foundation. I saved, I invested, I listened more than I spoke. Each paycheck was a brick in the empire they could not see rising. And then came the cracks in theirs. Jonathan's gambling debts whispered through the grapevine. Cecilia's lavish spending spilled into whispers of unpaid bills. They clung to the illusion of wealth like drunks clutching empty bottles. They thought the house would save them, that its grandeur would shelter their pride forever. But the walls they trusted were already tilting. And I was waiting. The night they mocked my clothes, I smiled because the deed was already within my reach. Their laughter wasn't cutting me anymore. It was crowning me. Every insult they threw was fuel for the fire I had carefully banked inside. That mansion, their shrine of arrogance, would belong to me. And when it did, their laughter would echo differently. It would sound like surrender. I walked into the mansion again, clothed in simplicity. A plain jacket, muted shoes, nothing to invite envy. I didn't need glitter. I needed only patience. They saw the modest fabric and grinned, as if it were a punchline delivered just for them. "Here comes the family beggar," Jonathan sneered, his glass tilting carelessly in his hand. Clara laughed louder than necessary, her golden earrings trembling like bells announcing my humiliation. The others followed, because cruelty in my family was contagious. I smiled, a smile polished to perfection, smooth enough to hide the steel beneath. Each insult they threw only knotted the rope they had been weaving for years. They believed they were mocking weakness. What they were truly mocking was the storm coiling in silence at their feet. The chandelier above bathed them in warm light, making their faces look almost angelic. But I knew their masks. Greed wore Jonathan's grin. Cecilia's smug tilt of her head was stitched with fear of losing control. Clara's laughter carried desperation. They thought the house, the grandeur, the illusion of wealth would protect them. I sipped my wine and let my forced laughter blend with theirs. Each chuckle I gave was a blade, sharpened quietly, invisible to them. They saw only meekness. They never saw the calculation behind my eyes. Inside me, the memory of every slight burned like coals, and yet I did not flinch. Their arrogance was blinding them. Their pride was strangling them. And soon, when the curtain finally fell, they would not even understand how the stage had collapsed beneath their feet. I raised my glass, the mask still in place. They had no idea. The beggar they mocked was already their executioner. They called themselves family, but to me they were a tribunal of tormentors, each one cloaked in civility for the world while wielding cruelty in private. I learned their faces like one learns a battlefield. Every weakness, every weapon, every scar. Cecilia, my stepmother, was the first blade I ever felt. To outsiders she was elegance, her pearls catching light, her laugh practiced to perfection. But behind closed doors, she wielded words like acid, whispering that my very existence was a burden, that my mother had left because of me. She poisoned every corner of my childhood, and yet she never realized her venom only made me immune. Then there was Jonathan, my cousin, who mocked me for books he claimed I'd never understand, who called me uneducated, as though the word itself were a leash. But Jonathan gambled in shadows, losing fortunes he never earned. I knew the debts were mounting. His laughter at me was nothing but the echo of his own ruin. And Clara, Cecilia's daughter, the golden one. To her, I was a servant disguised as kin. She used me to fetch, to carry, to endure her tantrums. Her beauty dazzled everyone, but I had seen the cracks. The way her eyes lingered too long on her own reflection, as though it were slipping away from her. Each of them despised me, because I was something they could not corrupt, resilient. I had no golden cage, no fortune to waste, no mask to maintain. I was survival itself, and they feared it. That night, as I walked among them, their words cut with the same dull sharpness as always, quieter but deliberate, as though rehearsed. Yet this time I did not bleed. This time, I measured each insult against the storm I carried. They built their fortress on sand, brick by brick, never noticing the tide rising beneath them. I was that tide, and when I crashed, nothing would stand. The day I signed the papers, my hands didn't tremble. They should have. After all, it was the day everything shifted. The day I stopped being their victim and became their reckoning. The ink dried slowly, curling into the fibers of the page like roots digging into soil, and with each stroke of the pen, I felt centuries of humiliation peel off my skin. They had no idea. I hid behind shell companies, false names, shadows upon shadows. To them, I was still the weak one, the forgotten child in plain clothes. They could never imagine that their downfall sat across the table, calmly buying the very roof over their heads. Their greed had made this moment possible. Jonathan's debts dragged them into desperation. Cecilia's appetite for luxury bled their accounts dry. They had clung to appearances, as if chandeliers and marble could keep creditors from the door. I circled patiently, like a vulture above carrion, waiting for the last beat of pride to falter. When it did, I swooped. The keys were placed in my hand. cold metal, heavy. I closed my fingers around them and felt the weight of justice. I walked through the mansion alone that evening. The air was different, emptier yet mine. My footsteps echoed on marble that had once carried the click of their heels. I touched the walls, my fingertips brushing paint as though I were feeling scars, my scars, etched into the structure itself. Every insult, every mocking laugh was trapped in these rooms, but now the house answered to me. Above me, the chandeliers still glimmered. Once they had been their crowns, their trophies, proof of superiority. Now they were mine. Their brilliance reflected not arrogance, but triumph. I stood in the grand dining room where I had endured the worst of their mockery. I pulled out a chair, sat at the head of the table, and for the first time, I wasn't invisible. I was sovereign. This house had been a monument to my humiliation. Now it would be the stage for my revenge. And when the curtain rose, they wouldn't even realize they were the actors in a play I had written. Weeks passed before I struck. Patience had always been my sharpest weapon. When the time came, I sealed the envelope with a steadiness that felt almost divine. No fury guided my hand, only precision. Each sentence I wrote was deliberate, crafted to cut deeper than any insult they had ever flung at me. Cold, formal, undeniable. I didn't need to witness their faces when the letter arrived. I could imagine them perfectly. Cecilia, reading it once, then again, her painted lips curling into disbelief. Jonathan, pacing, cursing, already scrambling for a lawyer he couldn't afford. Clara, clutching at her pearls, her voice rising to a shrill pitch as she asked how such a thing could happen. I could almost hear the shouting echo through the grand hall, see the accusing fingers, the frantic calls to attorneys who would offer no salvation. The mansion they clung to, the proof of their supposed superiority, had been pried from their grasp. No chandelier could disguise the truth now. The words of the letter had stripped them bare. Where once they laughed at my plain jacket, now they would pack their fine clothes into boxes, their arrogance folded away with every dress and suit. Their pride would not leave with them. It would remain here, shattered on the marble floors they once danced across. I imagined the silence that followed, the kind of silence that drowns even the memory of laughter. That silence was mine. It was sweeter than applause, more intoxicating than victory chants. It was the sound of justice. I had sent them a piece of paper, nothing more. Yet it had unraveled the fortress they built on lies and cruelty. And this was only the beginning, because what they lost was not just a house. It was the stage on which their downfall would play out under my command. I didn't have to lift another finger. Once the mansion slipped from their hands, the rest unraveled on its own. I stood at a distance, unseen, and watched as the empire they had worshipped crumbled like wet paper. Cecilia was the first to scatter. The woman who had once walked through gilded halls with pearls at her throat now found herself knocking on the doors of relatives who welcomed her with pity, not respect. Her laughter, once so sharp and cruel, was replaced by the hollow voice of a beggar asking for shelter. Jonathan's collapse was louder. Creditors circled him like wolves, tearing chunks from his pride with every demand for repayment. He had mocked me for not knowing numbers, yet his own addiction to dice and cards dragged him into chains of debt. The arrogance that once filled every room with his sneer was silenced under the weight of what he owed. And Clara, golden Clara, discovered beauty could not shield her from hunger. She tried, of course. Smiles charm, the tilt of her chin. But charm only opens doors when there's wealth behind it. Without the mansion, without the parties, without the shine of privilege, she was just another face fading into obscurity. Their cruelty, their betrayal, their greed. Each downfall was a stanza in a poem only fate could write. Karmic poetry. I read it line by line, savoring the rhythm of their suffering. I felt no guilt, only vindication. For the first time, I stood taller, my scars no longer shameful but carved into me like armor. They had mocked my survival, but survival had grown teeth. Strength, and strength had grown claws. Vengeance. The mansion was mine. The last laugh was mine. Yet the echoes of their cruelty remained, lingering in the walls as a reminder of what I had endured. But I understood now. Revenge was not an ending. It was a beginning. Now, when I walk the halls of the mansion, I hear only my footsteps. The echo stretches through marble corridors that once carried their laughter, their cruel jokes, their applause at my humiliation. That noise is gone. Silence lives here now. Some would call it loneliness. I call it peace. The chandeliers still hang above me, glittering like frozen stars. Once their light exposed me, stripped me bare, but tonight it crowns me. I no longer shrink beneath its brilliance. I walk beneath it as its master. In the grand dining room, I light a single candle. The flame flickers, small against the vastness of the room, but it is enough. I do not light it for them. I light it for the child who once sat in that very space, mocked into silence, invisible under their scorn. The child they abandoned. The child they tried to erase. Tonight, that child is remembered by me. I look into the glass cabinet by the wall, see my reflection shimmer in the candlelight. No longer the forgotten one, no longer the scapegoat. The face staring back is unshaken, unbroken. It belongs to someone who survived, who endured, who won. Revenge cannot undo pain. I know that. The scars remain, etched deep. But those scars are mine, and they are proof. Proof that betrayal did not end me. Proof that cruelty could not cage me. Proof that I rose stronger, untouchable. Their downfall was my justice. Their betrayal was my fire. And now I stand where they once stood, not as their victim, but as their reckoning. The story of the mocked child turned master will echo in these halls long after their scorn is forgotten.